トビデオ
Hey, did you know the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure franchise is like super popular right now? The rise of Hirohiko Araki's decade-spanning, genre-defying, dad rock referencing shonen manga series into the popular mainstream is an event that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. Permit me to be a complete hipster for a moment, but JoJo was one of the few franchises I got into before it got big. Back when I was a sophomore in college and pirating manga through MangaFox, one of my old college buddies recommended me this then unpublished in the States manga about a series of bizarre adventures. It took me a while to get on board, but once I did, I was hooked. Until I reached the Duane translations and stopped because I was weak. But the point is that when David Productions began adapting the series to anime, the popularity that sprang forth was totally well deserved. People may want to wrap themselves in irony and say that the appeal of the bizarre adventures of JoJo is in its general absurdity. After all, it's a series where an orangutan can physically manifest an entire ship. A series where muscular Aztec vampires make villainous speeches while casually doing air guitar. A series where the main bad guy of one arc is serial killer David Bowie, who has an obsession with being completely normal and average while simultaneously trying to satisfy his intense fetish for the soft hands of ladies.
Between us, it might be the most marvelous town on Earth. It's like we're on a romantic picnic.
But when you get past all the vampires, all the fabulous poses, all the farting Boston Terriers, and all the Steely Dan references, you see this epic story of good versus evil that spans time, location, realities, and genres. It's a story about heroes and villains pitting not just their strengths, but their wits against each other. The number of absurd superpowers in this franchise better shows that simply overpowering your opponent isn't enough. It's outsmarting them that ultimately takes them down. And that to me is the ultimate appeal of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. When you get down to brass tacks, it's an ultra-violent game of chess. And that's a love that even the most obnoxious fans can't take away from me. But there's one thing people should know. Before there was JoJo, there was Baoh. "17-year-old Ikuro Hashizawa is heavily injured in a car accident that kills both his parents. While recuperating in the hospital, he is kidnapped by a secret organization called Dorus in order to be a human guinea pig for the experiments of mad scientist Dr. Kasumi Nome. There, he is inserted with a parasitic worm that transforms his body and turns him into the ultimate bioweapon. A being with super strength, speed, and healing. A being that grows stronger upon being attacked by conventional weaponry. A being whose palms can melt steel, whose arms can slice through enemies like butter, and whose hair can turn into razor-sharp needles. Ikuro Hashizawa is no longer human. He is instead Baoh. 1989's Baoh, or as it's known by its full title, Baoh the Visitor, is the best kind of retro anime discovery. A semi-obscure property whose only venture outside the realm of manga was a short 50-minute OVA title in the 80s. But it turns out that that very OVA title is almost all it needs. It's well animated, tells the story in a tight, concise manner, and, on top of everything, is deliciously hyperviolent. But what really makes Baoh so unique in my eyes is its source. This OVA is on the opposite end of the spectrum of a title like, say, Toy, where both the anime and its source material are virtually unknown outside of Japan. What we have here instead is an adaptation of one of the first titles of the madman himself, Hirohiko Araki. Having spent the past almost 25 years writing JoJo, along with the anime causing international interest in the manga to skyrocket, Araki has become a legendary mangaka the world over, quite possibly on par with the likes of Takahashi, Toriyama, and Oda. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this in relation to Araki is because I feel that Baoh as a creation is an integral part to the creation of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Not just because it was the story that got Araki's foot in the door, or because of Baoh's appearance as a playable character in the fighting game All-Star Battle. What I'm saying here is that Baoh is, essentially, the pilot episode to the entire JoJo's Bizarre Adventure franchise. Now, before I get into the anime proper, let's talk biography. Hirohiko Araki was born on June 7, 1960 in Sendai, Japan. Because he grew up with older identical twin sisters whom he found very annoying, he spent a lot of his time in his room reading manga. But what really inspired his love for drawing was reading his father's collection of art books of famous European painters, specifically the works of Paul Gauguin and his use of color theory. From 4th grade onwards, Araki drew manga in secret away from the prying eyes of his disapproving parents. His first printed work was the one-shot western title submitted for Shonen Jump's annual Tezuka Awards titled The Bottle, but nearly every one of his titles were rejected by every manga publisher afterwards. It got to the point where he decided that he was gonna march over to the publishers of Shonen Sunday and demand to know why he was always being rejected. He chickened out immediately once he saw how big their building was and quietly went next door to the smaller building that housed the editors of Shonen Jump. It was there Araki met a rookie editor named Ryosuke Kabashima. Araki turned in another western one-shot called Poker Under Arms that he had spent all of the previous night on. Every time Kabashima flipped the page, he would find something to criticize. Even when he first saw the cover, his response was how Araki's whiteout had leaked all over the page. But just before Araki passed out from the sting of failure and exhaustion, Kabashima told him to go home, fix everything up, and bring the manga back to him in time for the next Tezuka Awards. The title would later win the runner-up prize that year. From that point onward, Kabashima became Araki's primary editor, mentor, and closest friend. He showed an affinity of suspense and horror stories with Araki, and always encouraged him to avoid writing what was popular and forge his own path as a creator. Kabashima would often be the lone voice sticking up for Araki, like when the Jump editors complained that his first serialized title, Cool Shock BT, was a little too out there. Kabashima would also encourage Araki to travel abroad and gather ideas for titles by taking Friday and Saturdays off for research, usually at the movie theater. It was around this time of mentoring that Araki began to publish Baoh, which at the time was his longest running title at a staggering 17 chapters. By Kabashima arranging Araki's schedule so that he could get enough sleep, and renting an apartment so he wouldn't have to commute, Baoh was the first pre-JoJo title that he had all his focus on. And by that logic, we can presume that Baoh was Araki's first real attempt to make the type of story that JoJo's Bizarre Adventure would eventually blossom into. And before anyone lays into me, yes, I know this is a bit of a gross oversimplification of history. A lot of his pre-JoJo works had elements that would eventually find their way into JoJo. BT from Cool Shot BT is basically a more heroic looking version of Dio, and the manga Araki produced after Baoh, Gorgeous Irene, has lots of JoJo elements such as shared character designs, fabulous poses, and a protagonist whose powers include shooting their fingernails at their enemies. But Baoh is the only pre-JoJo work of Araki's to be given an anime adaptation, so that's what we're going to talk about today. Upon reading the manga and watching the OVA, I came to the conclusion that Baoh was almost too perfect to adapt into a concise 48-minute short feature. The story itself is quite short, and there's not a lot of fat that needs to be trimmed in the transition from page to screen. And that's good because this is an anime that has no time to waste to introduce you to its concept. From the moment you press play, the anime hits the ground running. We open with a little girl running from a mysterious lady and her goons while on a moving freight train, and in the next 5 minutes we see that she has psychic powers, we see her stumble across Dr. Kasumi Nome and his Baoh experiments, and we see the girl and Baoh escape the train and the scientist. If that doesn't get you interested in what's going to happen, then I don't know what to tell you. Of course it does slow down a bit, mostly for exposition purposes, but even those scenes are given a lot of heart thanks to the relationship between Hashizawa and the girl named Sumire. Sumire is an orphan who's been hounded by Doris thanks to her psychic powers, and it allows her to form a close bond with Hashizawa and vice versa. Not only are they both trying to escape Doris, but they are also two souls adrift in the world, Hashizawa having no memory of his past life other than his name, and Sumire having no family or home to speak of.
Sumire-chan って言ったよね。
そう、平凡な名前でしょ。七種の私にほぼさんが勝手につけたらしいの。個人のお庭にはスミレの花がいっぱい。ほんでもってスミレ。
Is a connection that makes the relegation of Sumire to being Princess Peach to Bao's Mario a little easier to swallow.
しかし奴は来る。必ず来る。なぜならこの子が奴を呼ぶからだ。
Not a 100 Gex fan, I see. Even without the relationship between Sumire and Hashizawa, the anime does a really good job in executing its exposition. Sure, there's a lot of scenes where Dr. Kasumi Nome is mostly providing commentary or stating the total obvious, especially in the Animego dub.
Baoh has a laser cannon!
But I think the scene that shows how to really give the audience information is the scene where the good doctor is explaining how Baoh works to his benefactors by demonstrating its use on a dog, and then we will occasionally cut back to another scene where we see Hashizawa exhibit whatever quality Kasumi Nome is explaining. A good balance of both showing and telling. But while brevity might be the soul of wit, it does come with its own set of problems. For instance, as much as it wants to set up the tragedy of Hashizawa being forced to become Baoh against his will, it only really seems to scratch the surface of that issue. There's only really one instance where Hashizawa has his Jekyll and Hyde moment of "what monster have I become?" But to its credit, it's a creatively shot moment. The story might also baffle those who are unfamiliar of Araki's storytelling method of adding something that looks weird and cool for no other reason. Which is something I strongly advocate by the by, but if you want answers about Sumeri's weird pet squirrel thing, or why Doris's benefactors wear ancient golden tribal masks, or why one of the assassins sent Baoh's way is the fucking Terminator, then good luck, buddy. And then there's Hashizawa and Sumeri's relationship that is implied to be a little more romantic than it lets on, which kinda weird. Okay, to be fair, it's probably a one-sided schoolgirl crush on Sumeri's part, and the only romantic thing we see Hashizawa do is use his Baoh powers to revive Sumeri via a kiss of life. But then again, it does lead to this post-credit scene.
目覚めるわきっとそれは私が17になった時
Girly, you're in 4th grade. Cool it. But you didn't come to Baoh for the story. You came here for the ultraviolence and the Araki-induced insanity. And lucky for y'all, it does both with flying colors. This anime was made by Studio Pierrot, who are really putting all that magical girl money to work here. This may be one of the best looking ultraviolence titles of the 1980s. The animation staff really outdid themselves in putting the action in action-packed anime. They give their all in making all the action move quick, all the explosions feel hot, and all the gore look absolutely messy. If we can credit someone for this, it would have to be animation director / character designer Masayuki. Masayuki is mostly known for his work with Gainax, being a prominent storyboarder and director for the Evangelion series, and being Hideaki Anno's Gal Friday on the Rebuild movies. In many ways, Baoh feels like a lost Gainax anime. So many of the animation techniques employed are ones that you just can't help but associate with the studio, namely the liberal use of the runny eggs effect, where the animators eschew staying on model and simplify the detail in order to keep the animation running smooth, a technique that makes the blood and guts animation feel all the ickier. But a lot of credit has to be given to the actual key animators, who all bring their own talents to the screen. For instance, you've got the smooth morphing and effects animation of the late, great Hiroki Takagi. You also have Yoshiyuki Sadamoto, who brings real vitality to the action scenes and animates the hell out of the more complex choreography. There's even Anno himself doing some animation, and helping bring out the heat of a self-destructing laboratory. I could talk about the animation about all day, but in doing so, I would be completely ignoring the actual subject of this video, Baoh's connection to JoJo. Connecting Baoh to Araki's more well-known oeuvre is certainly not a difficult task. Already it's got Araki's trademarks such as the fantabulous poses, the over-the-top violence, and the penchant for animal abuse. Danny, no! And even if you just gleam through it, there's a lot of character designs that you can see be reused for JoJo. Not only is Baoh basically a skinnier Star Platinum, but he also bears a striking resemblance to the villain Cars, especially when he reveals the blades on his forearms. But I think the real connection Baoh has with JoJo is the larger-than-life characters. One of Araki's strengths is creating one-off villains that, despite having very little screen time, still manage to stick themselves in your mind. The character of number 22 only really exists to show off Baoh's melting powers, but his striking design of a shady assassin makes him a lot more memorable than just being putty. And there's also the aforementioned Terminator, Dorodo, whose cyborg attributes makes him more than just being a high-ranked henchman for Baoh to blow up. But the real star, other than Baoh, has to be Baoh's own personal Dio, Walken. A hulking Native American man with a reputation for being the world's most powerful psychic warrior, Walken makes the perfect vehicle for Araki's brand of crazy villainy. The first thing we see him do is reheat his coffee while laughing evilly, and it somehow works as hyping him up as a legitimate threat. And when Baoh finally confronts him, the first thing Walken does is carve the symbol of his people into his own chest using his bare hands.
あの血模様には戦う相手への尊敬と礼儀、そして死の意味が込められているという。つまりウォーケンはバオを真の戦士と認めたということだ。
If you need a reason to advocate on behalf of Araki for doing cool things regardless of whether or not they make sense, this is it. However, despite having all of Araki's brand of crazy and awesome all on display, Baoh does lack a level of sophistication in how it all is executed. At the time when he wrote Baoh, Araki still had some green on him as a creator. A lot of his best qualities as a writer are still underdeveloped at this time. As I said before, one of the biggest appeals of JoJo is that the battles are just as much battles of wits as they are strengths. Characters constantly analyzing their opponent's moves, looking for weaknesses, and finding openings to attack, all while trying not to die. We don't really get that in Baoh because we never really get into Hashizawa's mind when he is Baoh. In the story, Baoh doesn't appear to have the ability to talk, and mostly appears to act on instinct. While he does appear to grow more human as the anime progresses with his relationship with Sumire, that humanity never really shows up in his battle scenes where he's either just a one-man force of nature, or in the case of Walken, one brick smashing against another brick. It's because of this reason that Dr. Kasumi Nome and his lovely assistant exist less as villains and more as expository commentary, explaining to the audience what Baoh is doing right now and what that power entails.
バオの新しい武装現象。奴は電気を作り出している。それも高圧電流にも匹敵する強力なパワーを。
Not only does this give a flimsy justification as to why Baoh gets new powers every 30 seconds, but it also makes the audience feel very disconnected with the action. Because we don't get into Baoh's mindset as he's facing down villains like Walken, the action doesn't feel as strong as it could have. We don't get the opportunity to put ourselves in Baoh's shoes, so we just feel like gormless spectators like the Doctor and his assistant. The only difference being is that we don't get unceremoniously killed in a cave-in immediately after the battle is over.
私の生み出したバオよ。素晴らしい。お前は素晴らしい最終兵器よ。
Baoh is an anime of simple pleasures. It's got all the vigorous animation, action, and violence you could want from an OVA of this era, and whatever story problems there may be can easily get drowned out by the dumb fun this anime has. But as for this anime being the pilot series for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, yes, I still stand by that assessment. It may lack the complexity and intrigue that is part of the main appeal of JoJo, but it still nails its outrageousness and love of all things violently bizarre. So if you ask me, I think any JoJo fan worth their salt needs to watch Baoh because it is the seed that will grow into an 8-part Yggdrasil that is nurtured by 80s music and Milan fashion shows. And if you aren't a JoJo fan, see this anime anyway. At the very least, it's JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, minus the annoying fanbase who feel the need to constantly shoehorn tired references into everything.